All right. I had a few people tell me they're not going to make it, so won't wait for them. So now we're going to put a quick pause in covering philosophers for a second. We got to get caught up on our history. And so the next big chunk of history that we're going to be covering is the Greco-Persian Wars from 499 to 449 BC. So you'll notice it already overlapped a bunch of the philosophers' lives that we've been talking about. So, starting with the Greco-Persian Wars. Now, going back to 600 BC, we've already talked a lot about this map and the state of the world at this time. Remember, this was the world that Thales was born into. And he was born over here in Miletus under the kingdom of Lydia. So even though there's all these Greek colonies along the coast here, they come under Lydia's control. And so Miletus in particular, well, all of them, what they had this deal with Lydia. So their city-states are technically in the Lydian Empire. The deal that they had with Lydia is, if you allow us to control our own internal affairs, what we'll do is we'll contribute troops to you anytime you go to war. So they were a bunch of trading cities. They all became pretty wealthy, pretty powerful, have their own little mini armies, their own little mini fleets. So each of these cities is pretty powerful in their own right, and they come under Lydia's control.
That dark blue.
The dark blue is Lydia.
That's all water.
The light blue is water. This is Mediterranean.
Oh, okay.
This is
Okay,
Byzantine.
so that's land. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Sardis. Yeah, sorry. Blues really blend in there.
Okay.
To also realize the white wasn't water.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. Let's get oriented. Mediterranean Sea right here.
Yeah.
Here's Crete. Here's the Greek Peninsula. Black Sea. Byzantine would be right there. So modern day Turkey.
Okay.
Greece on okay.
Yeah, this is the Greek Peninsula. Athens right here. Sparta right here.
So Greece is clear over there.
Yeah, barely on the map.
Yeah.
Egypt down here. Babylonians.
I was
And
thinking if I
now
could find Italy, then
the
I could
Median
get
Empire.
oriented to it.
Yeah, Italy's not there.
Okay. What's that,
That blue
little
helps.
white spot in the blue?
Oh, this?
Yeah.
Just a tribe that Lydia doesn't quite have control over.
Okay.
So, dark blue is what Lydia currently has control over, which includes a bunch of the Greek colonies, the Ionian cities. They're under Lydian control. Now, over here in Persis, a Persian prince by the name of Cyrus starts a revolt against the Median Empire and starts overthrowing the Medes. And the people from Persis we call Persians, and so the empire he established we call the Persian Empire. So Cyrus the Great is on the rise over here. He starts conquering the Medes, which takes him over here to the border of Lydia. Lydia decides, as Cyrus is conquering, that this is a good time to try and expand our land. Cyrus has just overthrown this empire, so Lydia decides that they're going to go on the offensive against Cyrus the Great, against the Persians. So Lydia and Persians go to war. Now, what Cyrus the Great wants these Greek colonies to do, these Ionian cities to do, is to revolt against Lydia and to help him fight the Lydians. So he makes that offer to these Greek city-states. They tell him, no, we're going to side with Lydia in the conflict. Furthermore, they're actually contributing troops to help fight against the Persians in the conflict. So, surprise, surprise, Cyrus the Great ends up conquering all of Lydia. So now this is the Persian Empire. Here's Sardis, here's Lydia. It now comes under Cyrus the Great's rule. So he takes over all of Lydia. Naturally, he takes over the Greek city-states along the coast as well. And so these Greek city-states, once he conquers them, they say, okay, you got us. Now, we'll make the same deal with you that we did with Lydia. We'll go ahead, you just let us manage our internal affairs, and anytime you go to war, we'll go ahead and we'll contribute troops, and we'll also pay you some amount of taxes. Cyrus the Great says, no, no, no. That could have been the deal before. That's not going to fly now. And so now he's going to try and rule them with an iron fist. Now, there's a problem with Cyrus's approach to controlling these Ionian cities. It's not like when you conquer Egypt. Cyrus isn't the one who does it, but eventually the Persians conquer Egypt. When you conquer Egypt, if you get the pharaoh to fall in line, Egypt falls in line. Over here, when he conquered Lydia, if you can get the Lydian king to fall in line, all of Lydia falls in line. And so it's real easy to rule these big chunks. On the other hand, when you get Miletus to fall in line, one city-state, Samos, a few miles away, couldn't care less. They're not going to follow you just because Miletus did. And so each individual city-state requires you to rule them individually. And so what he's forced to do is instantiate tyrants in each of those cities. And so the tyrants would use the city's little army and the city's little fleet to control the little city and very much rule with the iron fist. Now what he would do is he would typically find someone who was already politically powerful in the city and establish them as a tyrant coming under him. So that's what he ended up having to do with these Greek city-states. And so we fast forward now. Notice that they were conquered 547 BC. The Greeks are now being ruled by tyrants in a bunch of these cities, which they don't like. They have a lot of political freedom. Now they've got it harder than most people in the Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire is still on the rise. By the time we get 511 BC, which is where our conflict begins, they've been under Persian control that entire time, these Ionian city-states. And now that Persia has been on the rise, they've been slowly intruding more and more upon mainland Greece. Darius got all the way to the point, you got the Macedonians, you got the Thracians, you've conquered all these Greek colonies all along these shores. And so tons of Greek colonies are now being ruled by the Persians. And what they would view as their ethnic neighbors are being ruled by the Persians. And now they're on Greece's doorstep. And so it's like a powder keg ready to go off. Conflict is pretty much inevitable. So, talk about that. So how does the conflict actually start? So remember, so now we're zoomed in here. Here's the Greek peninsula. Here's Peloponnesus. Over here are our Greek city-states that we're talking about, these Ionian colonies. So over here, one of these colonies, Miletus, the tyrant in that colony decides that he wants to expand his influence. So he goes to the local satrap. I should probably tell you the Persians, they had their empire split into a bunch of different provinces. Each little province came under a satrap. They were like a governor for that region. So Sardis was like the local capital of the Lydian province under the Persian Empire. So it's the capital city of that province, the same way that Phoenix is the capital city of Arizona. Anyways, so you have your tyrant at Miletus. He wants to expand his influence by conquering this island Naxos and having that as part of his control. He's got his own little army, his own little fleet. He's got to go get permission from the local satrap and get Persian support to actually go carry this out. So he goes, he makes his case. The local satrap, he likes it, gives him some soldiers as support, and he goes on his merry way, tries to take Naxos. This is an utter failure. It's terrible for him. He gets completely defeated, ends up having to go back to Miletus, and now he knows he's in trouble. Because he lost so bad, he knows best case scenario, he gets removed as tyrant. Worst case scenario, he loses his life. What's he going to do? Well, he's got his own little army, he's got his own little fleet. What he decides to do is to start a revolt against the Persians now. So he just went, attacked the Greeks, completely failed, and he decides, you know what, I'm going to start a revolt against the Persians now. That's what he decides to do. Now, Miletus is kind of seen as a big brother of a bunch of these cities over here. So Miletus does have some sway over these other city-states. So as Miletus starts rebelling, other Ionian cities fall in line and they start rebelling too. And so this tyrant at Miletus largely unifies the Greeks in an effort against the Persians, or at least the Ionians, in his failed attempt to attack the Greeks. Now, they know that there's no chance of them withstanding the Persian Empire by themselves. They need help from mainland Greece. And so first thing they do is they go to the Spartans. Remember, Spartans are the big boy on the block at the time over here in Greece proper. So they go to Sparta and they say, hey, will you support us with this military campaign? Now Sparta, remember, they've got their helps, they've got their slaves. They don't dare go on far campaigns that are going to be for extended periods of time. Furthermore, they can't afford to lose a lot of troops in their battles because they're so hard to replenish. So Sparta, they pretty much only care about what's going on locally. They pretty much say, no, you're on your own. Go find someone else. So they end up going, trying to elicit support in other places, and they end up getting Athens to support them and Eretria to support them. Two Greek city-states. And they're ethnically related to these guys. They would have been the ones to help set up a bunch of these colonies, so it makes sense that they'd support it. One more thing they did to try and elicit support, I should have mentioned, when they were overthrowing, when all these cities started rebelling and overthrew their tyrants, they started establishing democracies. And the reason that they were establishing democracies is because 510 BC is when Athens just overthrew a tyrant and established its own democracy. So they were also setting up systems of government to try and elicit support from Athens and appeal to them that way. So Athens very much is feeling for these guys. They just overthrew their own tyrant, established their democracy. These guys are all doing that. So they get the support of Athens and they get the support of Eretria. And so Athens and Eretria send troops over to help them in their revolt. They fight the Persians. they're able to beat them in a series of battles, and they go all the way to Sardis, and they're able to sack Sardis, the capital city of the local area. So that's in 498. Now, it takes the Persians time, but the Persians are able to mobilize and launch a counterattack against these Ionian cities and start forcing them to come under control. And so what ends up happening is, we'll keep it here. What ends up happening is they have a battle over here, the Battle of Lade. So it's about 5 years of the fighting going back and forth. And over here at the Battle of Lade, what ends up happening is the Persians have a fleet of about 600 at the time. And these Ionian city-states, along with some of their Greek allies, are able to put a fleet together of about 300 ships. So 300 against 600, it's not impossible, but it's definitely going to be a tough battle. They have their battle plan. What ends up happening is Samos, which Miletus and Samos, these are two of the biggest city-states there are. Samos ends up switching sides right before the battle's about to begin. And Samos alone would have accounted for about 60 of those ships. So you're talking about 1/5 to 1/4 of the fleet is Samos alone, of the Greeks, and right before the battle starts, Samos switches sides.
Back to Persia.
Back to Persia. So they betray the Greeks. That's enough to ensure a swift victory. The Greeks lose, Miletus gets raised, and a bunch of their inhabitants get killed and sold into slavery. So complete disaster. Why did Samos agree to switch? 2 reasons. One, Darius told him, we'll forgive all your past wrongs, and you'll be able to go back to being able to manage your internal affairs. The other reason is, looking back at this map, Darius and the Persians had control of this city right here, the Byzantine, which gives you all access to the Black Sea. So Samos is very much a trading city. They're a coastal city, they're a trading city. They need these trade networks to compete against their rivals. The rivals are largely the Phoenicians, which are down here in Persia. They already have access to the Black Sea. And so these guys are kind of being starved economically because they're being cut off by Persian influence. And so the Persians are going to allow them to start trading again. So that's one of their big motivations. They're going to become a wealthy city again. So that's why they switch sides. Talked about that. So it's a decisive victory. The Persians, they are able to reestablish order in all these cities, reestablish tyrants. The revolt fails. Okay, now the revolt fails. What's Darius going to do next? He's got to punish the Greeks who supported this revolt. So he punished Miletus, but he still needs to punish, in particular, Eretria and Athens for what they did. Now, while the revolt was going on over here, Macedonia and Thrace were able to get their independence for a little bit. So Darius gets his first army ready. So his first army, under Mardonius, 492 BC, that army's represented with the green arrows. The fleet comes along like this, and Mardonius starts right here, crosses the Hellespont, comes up here, reestablishes their dominance in Thrace, reestablishes Macedonia as a client kingdom, and they're getting ready to march down into Greece and attack, in particular, Eretria and Athens. That was the plan. Unfortunately, their fleet, unfortunately for them, their fleet, which was supplying their army, hit a massive storm, lost a bunch of ships. They could no longer support an army traveling on. And so they have to put their battle plans on hold. Now, since this first attack into Greece doesn't work, Darius decides he's going to start looking for a diplomatic solution. And he's going to go back and he's going to make an offer to these Greeks that he's made in the past and they've rejected in the past. Here's the offer he makes, in particular to Athens and to Sparta. He says, I want 3 things from you. 1, I want you to pay taxes to me. 2, I want you to support me with military units anytime I go out on campaign. And then 3, I want you to send me earth and water. Now, the first 2, the Greeks actually didn't have that much of a problem with. It's that third one that was a deal breaker for them and that they weren't going to budge on. Because they're sending earth and water to the great king was a way of recognizing him as a great king over you, recognizing yourself as his subject. It's kind of like prostrating yourself before a king. And for these Greeks, that was beneath the dignity of a free man. Remember that they, at this time, are all using these constitutional governments. They set up a constitution where the citizens willingly take the rules on themselves, right? A typical Persian had a much easier life under the law than your typical Spartan. But the Spartan intentionally subjected themselves to those harsh laws. It wasn't some king they were subject to deciding what they had to do. They chose to subject themselves to those harsh laws. And so, to give you a sense of the Spartan attitude, one of the famous quotes attributed to him is, "I do the things you won't, so I can continue to do the things you can't." So, in their minds, it's not about how harsh something is. It's, no, we are free people. We will not subject ourselves to you as a king. We're not your subjects. We'll be citizens, not subjects. And so that's actually the thing that is making it possible for the Persians to get through to these Greeks. Because from the Persians' perspective, this is crazy. They are much kinder than the Assyrians and the Babylonians that came before them. What they're asking for is hardly anything, and yet that's the thing that these Greeks keep rejecting. So Darius tries one more time. He sends his envoys to go talk to Athens and Sparta, saying, "Will you accept these terms?" Athens and Sparta have told him no in the past. He's not listening. So when the embassy comes to Athens, Athens flat out kick him off a cliff. Send a clear message. This isn't negotiable. Sparta decided to be cute about it. Sparta said they kicked the emissary down into a well. And they said, if you want earth and water for your king, it's down there. So it's very clear, no, we're not negotiating on this. And it's that earth and water thing, that's the non-go. So that's the rejection. So once Darius tries one more time to come up with a diplomatic solution, it's clearly told no, and now he knows we got to go full war mode. So he gets together his second army. Battle of Marathon. Before I talk about the Battle of Marathon, well, here's what we're talking about. So first invasion we already did. Second invasion. So the first invasion, this is the one that came up the top. The windstorm knocked him out in 492 BC. So the second invasion, where Darius is ready to go get him, this comes 490 BC. Those are the generals in charge. And they are going to be the ones coming by this water route. Now this time it's the brown. So rather than going up here through the Hellespont, they're going to take this water route. So they come along, get provisions in Samos. Remember, Samos is behaving now. It's a good city. It's able to... and now all these Ionians are also supporting the Persian fleet. That's huge because the Persians were largely a land-based empire. It's these Greeks who knew how to sail, so a lot of the Persian fleet is going to come from these cities as well as the Phoenicians down in the Middle East. Anyways, so here's the path that they're taking the second time through. Now, since they're coming by water, one of the first places they stop is Naxos. Remember, Naxos is the place that this all started. It started with Miletus failing to take Naxos. Naxos was able to hold out against them. So Darius is furious about that. So he completely destroys Naxos, razes the city, sells everyone to slavery, gone. Then he goes on island hopping, conquering other cities, and every other city he comes across, he's very kind to them, just imposes a basic system and goes on his merry way, sending a very clear message: we're only out to punish those who are against us. Those of you falling in line, you're good. So they take their fleet up here to Eretria. Remember, it was Eretria and Athens that were the large supporters of the Ionian Revolt. And once again, cities destroyed, populations killed or sold into slavery. And now they've got to come down and attack Athens. So this is the Battle of Marathon. Before we talk about the Battle of Marathon, we need to briefly talk about the Greek phalanx and how these guys fought. So the Greeks used what were called hoplites. A hoplite, what you had was a big, massive shield and then a long spear. And so this is actually a Macedonian phalanx. It's not a Greek one. So the Greeks had smaller spears, but still long spears. And then they had bigger shields than the one you see there. But so you would have your massive shield in front of you, and then you'd have your spear, and they had it set up so that 3 rows of Spartans, or 3 rows of hoplites could be attacking the enemy at the same time. You'll notice it's much more here with that picture. So that's how big the spears were, enough that 3 rows could be attacking at the same time. That way, any frontal assault that came on you, they would have to get through a lot of spear damage before they could ever reach you. So that was the Greek phalanx. It's incredibly powerful when it comes to frontal assaults, where it is incredibly weak is on its flanks. If you attack this way, they're completely exposed. If you attack the other way, they're completely exposed. And it's very hard to turn a group like this. They're very tight together, very slow moving, turning very slowly, can only pretty much attack the front. So that's the tactic of Greek fighting. This is a tactic that they're using throughout these Greco-Persian wars. Okay, so we get to the Battle of Marathon. show you on the map one more time where we are. So remember, the fleet had come along, the Persian fleet had gone up into Eretria, conquered there, and now we're coming down on Marathon here, right next to Athens. Now, I told you that Athens, not too long ago, had just overthrown their tyrant and established their democracy. The tyrant that they overthrew, his name was Hippias. When they overthrew him, he ran off to Persia, to the Persian king, saying, hey, if you can reestablish me as a tyrant at Athens, we can set up another little province there, making that our little capital, and gain control there. So when the Persians are coming here with this fleet, they have Hippias with them. Hippias is the one who knows the lands. He's telling them where to land. One of the things that the Persians have going for them is they have cavalry, which cavalry is great for getting around the phalanx and attacking it on the side. So he's also the one picking the place for him at Marathon, where it's some nice flat land that you can actually utilize these cavalry. And so Hippias is with them, and the goal of the Persians is to reinstate Hippias as the tyrant at Athens. That's their goal. Anyways, so zooming in now, at the Bay of Marathon, where they're coming to land their fleet. So looking a bit further out, this up here, you probably can't tell very well, but this right here is swampland, this right here is swampland. There's these two rivers here, and the armies end up lining up between the two rivers. Now the Persian fleet, they can't keep their boats right off the shore here. They got to keep them over here where they can get some break from the Mediterranean. So their ships are actually a little bit of a ways from the army, so the army cannot quickly board or unboard these ships. Anyway, so they get set up on the beach. And when they arrive there, Athens is ready with their army to fight them. To give you an idea of the numbers, for the Greeks, you're looking at about 9,000 to 10,000 Athenians and then 1,000 Plateans, just a local city nearby. The Persians, they had a grand total of about 46,000 troops with 600 warships. Now the Persians, they show up, they set up on the beach, and they kind of just wait there. And what they're waiting for is they're kind of hoping that they will realize that they can't win. People who supported Hippias back when he was a tyrant will switch sides, and they'll be able to do something very similar to what they did back with Samos when they were fighting the Ionian Greeks. So the Persians think that they can get some of these guys to switch sides, and that will pretty much make it a decisive victory, and we won't even have to fight the battle. The Athenians are also waiting. What are the Athenians waiting for? The second that they knew this army was coming, the Athenians sent someone to Sparta to ask Sparta to come help them in the fight. Now Sparta agreed to come help them in the fight, but they were in the middle of a religious festival. And so by their laws, they couldn't go fight until the festival was over. So Athens is holding out, hoping that the Spartans will show up to save them. The Persians are holding out, hoping that people will swap sides and join the Persians. That's what they're both waiting for. After 3 days, the Persians decided they're done with the waiting game. Here's their plan. They're going to load up 20,000 of their troops onto a bunch of their ships. So take half their army and leave half their army there. If the Greeks try and fight them, still having 26,000, that should be enough to handle the Greeks if they decide to attack. They load the other 20,000 up, and they decide that they're going to go around and go straight for Athens while the army isn't there. Now the Greeks are in trouble. They've got the army here that they have to deal with. They've got an army going towards Athens that they have to deal with. And second, word's gotten around the block about how Darius is treating these cities that he takes that were opposed to him. And so there's basically a big suicide pact in Athens for the women and children. If you see them coming without us, kill yourself. It's better than what you have waiting for you. So they are in huge trouble now. What are they going to do? They don't want a bunch of their citizens killing themselves, and they got to deal with this army. So as soon as the Persians load up on their ships and go, the Greeks tell you their battle plan. The Greeks decide it's time to attack, and they act quickly. Now here's their battle plan. What they do is they make one line of soldiers very thin at the top of the hill. I don't know how well you can see the different colors here. This is higher ground, lower ground, lowest ground. So notice how they lined up their army between these two streams so that they can't be flanked on either side. They make this line of soldiers very thin. These troops, your job is not to attack. Your job is to hold the line. Don't let the Persians pass you. And they have full phalanxes on each of these sides that are going to come and flank the Persian troops and attack like that. So they've been lined up ready to go for a while. Once the Persians get on their ship to start sailing away, the Greeks suddenly act. And it's very quick, very unexpected. It said that it was so fast that the Persians didn't even have time to get a volley of arrows off. That's how quick the Greeks came at him. And so the Greeks come at him quick enough. The front line is able to hold the troops. They're eventually able to flank them, winning on the flanks, and then the army collapses. And once the army collapses, these guys are in trouble because their ships are a ways away. And so as they're trying to get to their ships, it's a very unorganized retreat. A bunch of them die. Furthermore, they lose a bunch of ships in the process. So this is a huge defeat for the Persians. So Persian casualties are about 6,400, and they get 7 of their ships destroyed. While for the Greeks, it's 192 Athenians and 11 Plateans. It's almost nothing.
How do we have such specific numbers?
So you're going to get rounded numbers a lot of the times on these. The reasons you can sometimes get pretty specific numbers on these is because a city-state is going to be very aware of how many of its citizens just died in that battle. So the Greeks have better access to their own numbers than they do Persian numbers.
And they recorded all of this?
Yeah, Herodotus is largely the historian who records all this. Anyways, so it's a huge defeat for the Persians right there on the beach. Now, they send a runner, very famous runner, from Marathon to Athens as quickly as they can with the message, we won. So that they won't kill themselves when the other Persian army gets there in case the other Persian army beats them. So he goes, he does his sprint, which is where we get our name Marathon from, sprints there as fast as he can, tells them that we won, and the story goes that he collapses and dies of exhaustion right after the fact. So he made the sprint, but the rest of the army comes along. And the rest of the army is actually able to get to Athens before the Persians can get off their ship. And for the Persians, on the ship, what just happened? They just left that army on the beach, they come around, and there that army is. What happened to their other army? So, again, they come in, you might not be able to see the brown very good, they come fight that battle, you see the fleet goes there, and then they kind of drift off. And they decide this invasion attempt isn't going to work. Now Darius is furious with these Greeks. 2 invasion attempts have failed. One of them was an absolutely humiliating defeat for him. Now he is going to mobilize all of Persia against these Greeks. That's what he's out to do. Now, unfortunately for him, he has some revolts that happen, in particularly with Egypt, that end up occupying some of his time and resources. And so it takes a good 10 years for them to get a new army together. And in that time, Darius dies off, and his successor, Xerxes, comes to power. But Xerxes still intends to follow through with his dad's battle plan, take that great army, and go straight for Greece. So, we talked about that. Now, there was a big question in Athens after they won at Marathon. And the big question was, are the Persians going to try this again? Right? They had one attempt up north, bad weather, kind of broke it down. They had another attempt trying to kill us, or trying to beat us, and it was a decisive defeat for them. Absolutely humiliating. Will they actually try to attack us again? That was a big question in the Greeks' mind. Because remember, it takes them 10 years to come back. So it's a valid question. And so that's a topic, a common topic in Athenian politics. Athens also discovers a pretty good-sized silver mine in Attica. And so now the government comes into contact with all of the silver. They start debating, what should we do with all the silver? Pretty famous politician by the name of Themistocles, he says, we should use this silver to build up a fleet and get a strong fleet because the Persians are eventually going to come back. And he's able to convince them enough that Athens does use the silver and starts building up a pretty powerful fleet for the Greeks, which, good thing they did. So then, Xerxes, once he gets his army together, ready to go, he's mobilized Persia, he's ready to attack, he invades Greece. So Xerxes invades Greece, 480 BC, with, Herodotus says, 2.6 million. Modern estimates are closer to about 300,000 military personnel. How do they justify some of this? Rome at its height seemed to be able to maintain an army of about 500,000, so 2.6 seems a bit far-fetched. What they think happened is part of this mistake is Herodotus accidentally miscounted by a factor of 10. So he knew a name for a group of personnel. He thought the name meant 1,000 when it only actually meant 100 or something like that. So they have their explanations for why they fudged these numbers, but they fudged the numbers. And then they got a better estimate on the actual number of ships, 1,207. Anyway, so Xerxes puts together this massive army with one purpose: we're going to Greece. Now, you should know that in Greek politics, if you're a powerful politician, it's very common that your city ends up kicking you out of the city. You have too much influence, too much control. Happen pretty frequently. For whatever reason, you get exiled from your city. Hippias got exiled, he ran to the Persians. It's a common thing, if you get exiled from your city and you're a powerful person, run to the Persians and see what you can do there. So there's a Spartan king, he was exiled from his city, what do? He went to the Persians. So there was some Spartan king and he was serving under Xerxes in whatever capacity. Anyways, as they're bringing this army, and Xerxes has got together, they're gathering, getting ready to cross the Hellespont, Xerxes asked his Spartan king if anyone would dare oppose his army. Am I even going to have to fight these Greeks, or will just seeing this army be enough to put them in their place? And he has a pretty famous reply. He replies that Spartans will not, under any circumstance, accept terms which would mean slavery for Greece. It's not going to happen. No chance. Now, I don't know how seriously Xerxes took him, but probably should have taken him more seriously than he did. So this campaign now, Xerxes, that's going to be the pink one. So they're coming up here. They cross the Hellespont. Funny story there. The first bridge that they tried to set up to cross the Hellespont ended up collapsing on him. And so Xerxes had a bunch of his soldiers go out there and whip the sea for violating him like that. If he's going to put a bridge over you, you cooperate. They end up putting a bridge over the Hellespont and crossing the Hellespont. Once they actually cross the Hellespont, that's when Greeks start to panic. They realize, okay, this army's coming, we got to get ready for this army. Now, it's important to keep in mind, it's not all of Greece united against the Persians. It's only this dark blue portion of Greece that's united against these Persians. A bunch of these people were okay to give them the earth and the water. What's the big deal, right? So a bunch of them were okay to go along with it. They're largely neutral. If the Persians win and they end up being Persian subjects, so be it. If the Greeks end up winning and, okay, we get to continue as Greeks, so be it. So a bunch of them are neutral, and as Persia comes through, a bunch of them are actually going to just join Persia. So it's not all of Greece united against the Persians. It's going to be these blue. It's roughly 30 city-states united against the Persians in this war. Anyways, so Xerxes got his army. He crosses the Hellespont, starts coming along. So in the dark blue, these guys get together a war council. Fortunately, Sparta's involved. So they get together a war council and they start deciding what are they going to do about this attack. And so they come up with a plan to get into mainland Greece. Notice that all their allies are pretty much down here. To get into mainland Greece, there's a pass right here called Thermopylae that you have to pass. It's a pretty narrow pass, pretty easy to walk. Furthermore, this is an island right here, so this is a water path right here. This seems like a natural point to hold off the fleet. So they decide that they're going to block the fleet here, they're going to block the military army here, while Greece gets a chance to mobilize. So that's the big plan. So hold them up at Thermopylae, and hold them up here at the Cape of Artemisium. So that's the plan. Now, I'm assuming Battle of Thermopylae is next. Yes. Okay. So now, Spartans, very religious. You can only fight during certain times. The problem that they had is that as this army was coming down, it was going to be, the Spartans needed to be there during a time period that their religious holidays wouldn't allow them to be technically at war. So, famous king by the name of Leonidas, he knows that this is a problem and he's got to do something about it. And for reasons from an oracle from Delphi, he also thinks he has to do something about it. He feels like he's getting this religious prompting to act. So he can't take an army, that would be breaking the law. But what a king can do is he can get a royal guard to come with him as he takes a walk about Greece. So he's going to go for a stroll around Greece. He's not going to war. And he's going to take 300 Spartans as his honor guard. Now that's okay under Spartan law. So he takes these 300 Spartans and everybody knows what he's doing. And so as he's going, he ends up getting other recruits along the way. Some famous recruits that he gets are actually from Thebes. I think it's 2,000 of them. They're so disgusted that Thebes is not helping in this war that they're going to go help fight with Leonidas. And the guys going to fight, they know that this is just a stalling tactic. This is not a we have any chance of winning tactic. And you should know, at the time, I mean, your three big shots here are Athens, Thebes, and Sparta. And Thebes isn't even contributing in this battle. That's a huge moral blow to all of Greece that they're not helping. Very shameful. Anyways, so Leonidas, he's gathering his recruits as he goes, going up to Thermopylae to hold off Thermopylae to give the rest of Greece time to mobilize and get their armies ready. So zooming in now on that pass there that the Persians have to go through. So Leonidas sets out with 300 Spartans to hold the pass at Thermopylae and is joined by other Greek forces. When it's all said and done, they have about 7,000 men that they have to hold this pass with. They build a little wall to give them some defenses, but they have to split their army because there is this secret pass that you can take which would allow you to come out behind them. So they have to leave some of their army to hold the pass, a couple thousand, and then the majority of the army is going to actually hold right there at Thermopylae. So some of them blocking the secret pass, some of them holding actually at Thermopylae. That's the battle plan. The only goal here is to actually hold out. And so the fighting starts, and as the fighting starts, these Greeks are able to just withstand against these Persians. It is absolutely crazy to the Persians. Since there is such a narrow pass, Persian numbers can't really do anything to them. And the Persians kind of thought that they were going to step aside. So, two famous quotes from the battle. One of them is, Xerxes tells them, lay down your arms. Leonidas responds, come and get them. After a little bit of fighting, and Xerxes thinks that there's no chance that they can win, and they must see that defeat is inevitable at this point. His famous line is, our arrows are going to block out the sun. Leonidas' famous response, then we'll fight in the shade. So they're not going anywhere. So they end up fighting. 2 days, they're getting nowhere. And Xerxes is getting frustrated. He sent in all sorts of troops, and it even got to the point where he sent in what are called his immortals. These are his elite guard, the best of the best that Persia has to offer. And even the Persian and even the immortals can't get past these Greeks holding this little wall. And so finally, a Greek trader ends up telling Xerxes about this pass that goes around. And so Xerxes then, after 2 days, sends a bunch of troops to actually go around. Now, for whatever reason, we don't really have a good reason why, whatever troops were supposed to be there were not able to hold off that pass. We don't know if they saw the army coming and just ran. We don't know of any fighting that took place there. But for whatever reason, there doesn't seem to have been much resistance for the troops coming around. And so the Greeks knew that they were about to be encircled. They knew that troops were coming to encircle them before they actually got there. And so the Spartans say, we will hold the lines while the rest of you retreat. There's no chance anymore. This plan, it's over. We'll hold them while you guys retreat so that you can get away from the battle. Which turns out to be the battle plan. Now, it's not just the Spartans who stay. A few other Greeks stay behind as well to fight with them. Notably, all the Thebans stayed behind as well to fight with them. And they fight pretty much to the last man. When it's just the Thebans left, then the Thebans actually surrender. They don't have as much qualms about surrendering as the Spartans do. So, it's not even a huge win for the Greeks. The Greeks lose 4,000, the Persians lose 20,000. Yeah, the Persians lost a lot more. But this is a defeat for the Greeks. And these are sustainable losses for the Persians. This is going to hurt Greece more than it's going to hurt the Persians. And yet the fact that they were willing to do this, it just galvanizes Greece. Thermopylae becomes almost a war cry for the rest of Greece. And so even though it's a defeat, Greeks are celebrating what they did here and what these 300 Spartans did here. And obviously, I say 300 Spartans, you still know who I'm talking about today.
Yeah.
It's nuts. So it's a defeat. And it probably does a lot more to hurt the Persians than it does to help. Anyways, so they get past here. At the same time, remember that they were holding off the fleet over here.
Yeah.
So there were 2 battles going on simultaneously. There was a land battle at Thermopylae, and another battle over here at the Cape of Artemisium. Now, things were not going as well over here. This gap here is pretty wide. The Persians had a very superior fleet. It was much harder to hold this. And so, at this battle, you got Greeks with 271 ships, Persians with 1,207 ships. And it's much harder to get in a place where numbers don't count.
Yeah.
But they were able to hold them off for the 2 days, holding off the fleet here. Now, the Persians, they're getting kind of annoyed trying to take out this fleet because they are still holding them off. And so the Persians actually send 200 ships around the island who are going to come behind and flank them. Now, unfortunately, those 200 ships were lost in a storm. So their flanking tactic failed. Once they find out that Thermopylae had been lost, there's no point holding this anymore. And so then they retreat back to Athens. So that's that battle. In that battle, Greeks lost 100 ships and Persians lost 400 ships. We don't know if this 400 was what was actually lost at the battle or if it includes the 200 that went around as well. So you're going to see there's now 200 ships of wiggle room in estimating Persian ship numbers.
Why are Greeks' numbers always so superior than the Persians?
The Greek numbers are superior?
Like in killed to death. Like they're a lot more Persians are dying than Greeks are.
Oh, that's what you're saying. Yes. The only way for Greece to beat Persia is to have these insane kill-to-death ratios. I mean, going back up to this map, this is Persia. Some of this is who they're fighting. It's not all the Greeks unite against them. It's some of these guys against these guys.
How did they end up being so superior in combat? That's what I'm curious to Greeks, right?
Well, we already talked a lot about the Spartans. But a lot of it has to do with just the Greek mentality. Sparta was viewed as a city-state to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Looked at as a role model. They're the role model to everyone else for most of this time until Athens rise. They're the one everyone looks to. They're the one everyone makes an example of. And so they're the one that they model their fighting styles after, whatever the Spartans are doing. Now, the Spartans are superior to everyone else, but that's who they're modeling themselves after. And in these ancient battles that you fight, the majority of the casualties don't actually happen during the fighting. It happens when one army decides that the battle can't be won anymore and tries to flee. That's when you have just terrible casualties. And so that's why, if you think back when we were talking about the Ionian Revolt, when the ships at Samos betrayed the Greeks, that was enough to get the Greeks to hightail, which meant there's going to be crazy casualties for the Greeks now. And so a huge part of ancient battle tactics is keeping your soldiers on the battlefield in whatever way you can and trying to drive the other soldiers off the battlefield.
So is their commitment.
Yeah, so a big part of it is your resolve to not leave. They weren't mercenaries fighting for money, thinking, well, I can't spend money if I'm dead. They're people fighting for their family, their city, their own freedom. I mean, give me liberty or give me death has its sentiments early in Western civilization already here. So, these Greeks are far, far less likely to flee a battlefield than, these Persian soldiers sent hundreds of miles from home to fight a battle that they don't really care about the outcome of. Thermopylae we did that battle. Okay, so you had the initial battle plans down the drain. We can't hold them here and here, so the Greeks have to come up with a new battle plan. Where are they going to hold off against the Persians? Because now the Persians are past here, it's kind of open season for all of Greece that isn't over here on the Peloponnesus. And so, since Spartan's kind of the big boy on the block, all they really care about is this part of Greece. That's kind of the part of Greece that has all their allies. And so, what they want is, over here at the Isthmus of Corinth, that little small piece of land there, is where they say we should set up our land defenses so that the Persians can't make any more inroads into mainland Greece. And then there's actually a lot of debate about where they should have the fleet. Where should the fleet try to hold them off? There's a lot of back and forth on this. There's a lot of arguing about this. But they decide that the fleet should be stationed over here. You can't see it very well. We'll zoom in on it in a second. But there's an island here called, what is it? Salamis? Salamis, thank you. There's an island over here called Salamis, and then mainland Greece. They decide to keep their fleet in between that island and mainland Greece. That's where they decide to keep their fleet. Now you might think, why don't the Persians just keep going on their merry way, forget the fleet, and move their fleet past? And the reason is, you can't leave your supply lines vulnerable like that. So if they keep their fleet here, the Persians have to deal with it. They can't just leave the fleet there and go on their merry way. That's asking for disaster. So this ends up being the new battle plan. Land army being held here, sea army, the fleet being held here. Now notice that this opens all of this part of Greece to the Persians. And the Persians ransack and destroy all of that part of Greece. Athens is completely burned to the ground. All that Athens, before this fight went on, Athens this time evacuated all their women and children into the Peloponnesus.
Is that what all did?
The women and children. Oh, the other city-states? I don't know. I would guess. They knew this was coming and they were much more prepared this time.
I assume they didn't try to resist and fight. They all went and helped Sparta. didn't they?
Some of them, yes. If you were in this war council, you very much knew what the plans were. And you knew it would have been hopeless to try and keep your army and just hold some random place.
Okay.
So yeah, I would think most of the blue cities would have sent their women and children over here, and they're contributing their soldiers in the army here. And so their cities just get destroyed. Athens, it's not a city anymore. It's razed to the ground, burned to the ground. All the surrounding farmland, crops, everything burned. It's gone. All the people in the city, you had all their men that were going to fight evacuated to this island. They're on an island and they got their boats. And the rest of their population is scattered throughout the rest of the Peloponnesus. What is left of Athens?
So sad.
A fleet. That's what's left of Athens. A fleet and their people. That's how dire the situation is. I mean, you could think at this point, Xerxes could call it a day. He's pretty much got what he was after, and he could just start setting up his empire. Thebes fell easy enough. He could start using them as his next hub of power. There's no reason that he has to keep pushing against these guys. But he keeps pushing against them. And so we get the famous battle of Salamis, the turning point of the war. So this is zooming in now on the island. Mainland Greece, here's the island. They're keeping their fleet here, in between the island and mainland Greece. And the Persians have their fleet out here. Now, give you a sense of the numbers really quick. So the Greeks at this time, they've been able to mobilize, so they got their whole fleet together. And remember, Athens took the time to build their fleet. I'm not sure how many of these ships are Athens. Should have figured that out. That would have been cool to know. But Greece now has a decent-sized fleet, 371 to 378 ships. But the Persians still outnumber them by a good amount. 600 to 800. Notice there's a 200 margin of error there because we're not sure about the 200 that got lost to the storm. And so the Greeks, they are trying to figure out what they're going to do because they're in a pretty dire situation. Persia has them nailed in here. Now the Greeks refuse to go outside of the space between mainland Greece and the island of Salamis. And the reason they won't is because of the design of their ships. You need to understand a little bit of the design of the two ships we're talking about. So over here is a standard Greek trireme at the time. The Greek trireme was built out of much heavier wood, and you'll notice at the bottom here is a big honking piece of bronze. And what the Greeks would do, they built heavier ships, they would aim their ship at you, and then they would row into you as fast as they could and ram into your ship. That would start sinking your ship, and then the soldiers, who are heavy infantry, would then rush off of that ship into the enemy ship. That's how they fought. The Persians had much bigger boats, but much lighter weight ships. And what they would do is just load their ships with archers and try using projectiles to kill the enemy. So it would be harder for Greece to go and ram them out in open water, but if they can draw these big Persian ships into this more narrow pass, it's harder for these Persian ships to maneuver, it's easier for these ships to maneuver. And then they can line up, they can ram into these ships, and if they can ram into these ships, Greek hoplites in hand-to-hand combat against these lightly armed Persian archers, it's going to be a slaughter. So that's what they need. Now the Persians had these big ships with a bunch of archers. They also had smaller ships, also built out of very light wood, which were meant to be really fast to catch up with your enemy. Between the island of Salamis and mainland Greece, the waters are very choppy. Those lighter, smaller Persian ships are very susceptible to being capsized. And so it's a great place to stay to neutralize the Persian threat. So the Persians don't really want to go charging in there to attack the Greeks. They understand that's giving the Greeks a huge advantage. At the same time, the Greeks don't dare come out because they know that's giving the Persians a huge advantage. So they're in a little bit of a stalemate. So what do? Themistocles has one of his men pretend to go traitor on the Persians. Remember, this has already worked twice for the Persians. Someone came traitor, and that changed everything. So he has someone pretend to turn traitor on the Persians and to give him bad information. He tells him that the Athenians, that this fleet, their morale is completely gone. They're going to try and evacuate out in the back end and completely scatter. They're going to be on the retreat. Now, the Persians have had spies in Greece, and the Greeks were arguing for a long time about where to keep the fleet. And so it was very contentious where to keep the fleet, and so this was a very believable lie. Xerxes had known that there had been a lot of fighting about it. He knew that there had been a lot of infighting. This seemed like the perfect chance to get him. And so what he did is he sent some of his fleet around to the other side of the island. Not sure how much was split, but basically to block off their retreat. So these guys would pretty much be charging into a trap, is what he thinks. And then they're going to just burst in when they see the Greeks start retreating. And so just as his spy told him, all these Greeks up and started retreating into three major groups. And so the Persians go in. And when the Persians go in, the Greeks turn around on a dime and come right back at him. ramming them. And so it was a devastating loss for the Persians. The Greeks lost about 40 ships. The Persians lost 200 to 300 ships. This was a devastating blow to the Persians. And it's so terrible that Xerxes ends up taking his fleet and heading off. So Xerxes leaves. Now, they're not gone. There's still the mainland army in Greece, and there's still enough of the fleet to help support the army with supplies, but for the most part, the fleet is out of the game. Now, the Greeks, they can't believe it for a second. They see the fleet take off, and they think there's no way, this has got to be a trick. They had no clue how decisive their victory was over the Persians initially. And so they eventually realized, okay, they're actually gone. And we can go on to start going on the offensive and go attack. So the Greek fleet is now going to be able to go somewhere else. But now we got to talk about the land army. So the fleet, huge defeat at Salamis. Now Greece is mobilizing a year later to get ready to take on the Persian army that was left behind. After Salamis, Greece is no longer on the defensive. They're now going on the offensive, and they're going to bring the battle to the Persians. The Persians were pretty much stationing their army close to Thebes, because Thebes just fell to them, and so that was a good place for them to basically make camp. And so the next battle that we're going to talk about, it's a year later, it's over here at Platea. And notice how close it is to Thebes. And so at this time, all the Greek allies have been able to fully mobilize their armies, and Greece is actually going to get together the biggest land army it's had this whole time. So in this battle, Greeks have 80 to 110,000. Persians, hard to know, they have somewhere from 120 to 150,000 Persians, which includes 10,000 cavalry. And then they have another 50,000 Greek allies. So you're talking about 170 to 300,000 for the Persians' numbers, between 80 to 110,000 for the Greeks. So they're still largely outnumbered, but far and away the best army the Greeks have been able to put up so far. And so the the Greeks, they get ready, they get their army together. You notice those three different colors. You've got the Spartans and the soldiers coming under them. They're on the right. That's the honorary position. It's just a custom that you put your strongest army on the right at the time. And so,
Why?
so remember, a lot of battles were won when you got the other side to retreat. And so if you could break the line in one spot and cause the army to start crumbling in one spot and get them running off the field, once you get some people running off the field, pretty much everyone starts running off the field. Because think about you as a local soldier in one of these battles. You can't see bird's eye view what's going on. You can't see if I just hang in there, we're actually winning this. All you know is the guys next to you are running. They must know something you don't. You going to wait to find out who's right? Or are you going to start running?
So it's a chain
And so it creates a chain reaction. Everyone starts flooding. So if you can get somewhere on the battlefield, get the soldiers to start retreating off the field, it very easily creates this chain reaction. And so the tactic is put all your strongest troops right up the right side, pick apart, and then just pound through right there as hard as you can, end the battle as fast as possible. So that's the idea. So Spartans are holding up that side. Athens, now they've got hold of the left side. They're going to stand against whatever is the strongest on the other side. Their job is just to hold, let the Spartans break through. And then you have other Greek allies. And they actually set up down here. Now, the darker color means you're on higher ground. The lighter color means you're on lower ground. Fighting downhill, good. Fighting uphill, bad. So the Greeks want to be fighting downhill. Initially, they're holding this position. And you've got these rivers right here, a couple streams. And you got the Persian camp here. And the Persians set up camp over here. And they end up having a little bit of a stare-off again like they did previously. None of them wants to move. The Persians, they want to stay here on the low ground in the open field because they got their cavalry. They want to be able to use those cavalry. And so they want to force the Greeks to come to them. The Greeks, on the other hand, they've got the high ground. They want to force the Persians to come to them, plus the Greeks are outnumbered. Now the Greeks end up moving to a closer position here, staying on the high ground, but still kind of being caught between these rivers, so that would be really hard to flank you. Now what the Persians did, the whole time they're just harassment tactics, harassing them over and over again, using their cavalry to harass them. Some Persian cavalry was able to cut off the water supply coming down the river to the Greeks. And now the Greeks don't have water. That's a problem. They've got to do something. So the Greeks, they decide, we can't do this fight right now. We've got to retreat back to where we were and reset up our position there. So they decide they're just going to go back to where they were. Now, they end up doing a terrible job in this controlled retreat. Somehow things got confused, and so the Athenians thought that they were coming over here to Platea. the allies here, they kind of follow a path kind of like that. They're like, are we going this way? Oh no, we're going this way. And the Spartans were the only ones who stuck with the actual battle plan. They start retreating that way. Their retreat looks so messy that the Persians just assume they're trying to flee the battlefield. And remember, that's your opportunity to strike.
Right.
Get them while they're fleeing. And so the Persians just release their army and have them go charging at the Greeks. The problem is that the Greeks were not retreating. And so, well, they were retreating, but they weren't running away from the army. They were still ready to fight. And so as the Greeks are going and they see these guys coming out to fight, they're confused. Okay, we'll fight. And so they turn on a dime, and these guys, expecting to run into an army trying to flee the battlefield, ends up running into completely formed formations. In particular, the cavalry was sent, you got the Spartans on the run, go get them as fast as possible. And so the cavalry instantly charged at the Spartans. The Spartans famously withheld the cavalry charge and just demolished the cavalry. And once the Persians lost the cavalry, now the routing went the other way. And so, as quickly as it seemed like they were routing this way, it turned into a route that way. And this route was so awful for the Persians, they didn't even have time to empty out their camp to fight. That's how fast everything turned. At one moment, they were charging at him. The next, they were fleeing the battlefield. And so this is just a devastating loss for the Persian army. So, Persians lost 50 to 257,000, depending on the estimates.
That's a big.
It's a big estimate, but look at the play that we have in their numbers. The point here is that it is a devastating loss for the Persian army and their allies. Well, the Greek losses, we all know what they were, but they were insignificant. This was just a huge blunder for the Persians. Their army gets absolutely destroyed here. And so, this roughly happens, the Battle of Platea roughly happens, well, remember that this is happening a year after the Battle of Salamis. So, those ships at Salamis were able to go start another naval conflict. So we're going to jump to what the fleet was doing at the same time. So the land army of Persia just got annihilated. That's not a thing anymore. There's no longer a Persian army in Greece after this. The Greek fleet went to support a battle over here on the coast, actually. So Greece, they took their fleet, and remember, they're now going on the offensive, attacking. And they're going to help to try and liberate some of the Ionian cities that were supporting them. And so they're going on the offensive here. They fight a battle over here at Mycale, not sure how to pronounce it, Mycale. But it doesn't end up being a naval battle. But the point is, as a result of that battle, the Persians lose access to their ships, and the Greeks are able to destroy their fleet. So in that conflict, you have about 40,000 Greek men with 110 to 250 Greek ships, but the ships don't actually participate in the fighting. It turns out to be a completely land battle. The Persians only had about 60,000 men, but they were in control of 300 ships. And so the land battle happens, and it's not really a one-sided battle, but the Greeks end up being the Persians. The thing that makes it one-sided is these 60,000 Persians had access to those 300 ships. And so it's their fleet that gets annihilated from this, even though the battle was a close battle. So while the Greek losses are considerable, Persia loses their entire fleet. Now between Marathon, the battle we just did, and the battle of Mycale, I don't know, however you pronounce it, the Persian army is decisively defeated. You lost your land army and you lost your fleet, all, stories say, within the same day. I don't know if that's true, but very close to each other, back to back, both these losses. And so from here on out, Greeks are completely on the offensive. And Persia won't be on the offensive again against the Greeks. From here on out, it's Greeks against the Persians for the most part. And so this is when Athens begins its rise.
After it was raised.
After it was raised to the ground. Should have mentioned something about that. So the Battle of Platea, remember the Persians weren't even able to exit their camp.
Yeah.
A bunch of Persian war treasure was there at Platea that they had ransacked the entire time. The very tent that Xerxes was staying in, he left behind when he fled. And so you had access to a bunch of the king's treasure right there. And so the victory of that battle, not only did you destroy the Persian army, that's one thing that gave them access to a ton of wealth for these Greek allies. So that was one massive influx of wealth. The other thing that happens is, so once the Persian army is defeated at Platea, the question for Greece is, how far do we go towards fighting these Persians now? And here's where you see the split between the allies. Remember, Sparta, here's what Sparta cares about, the Peloponnesus. Persia is no longer a threat to the Peloponnesus. They're done. They're out. And all of Sparta's allies are pretty much out. There was Sparta. And so now it's Athens and her allies that are going to continue this war effort against the Persians. And so they're using their fleet, and they're going around, and they're starting to liberate island after island, going island hopping. We won't cover any of these battles, but 432, 465, they're all over the place, years apart, slowly reconquering all these cities and re-establishing these Greek colonies as Greek city-states. And they end up setting up an institution called the Delian League, which they're the head of. Now here's what happens with the Delian League. Athens says if you join the league, you got to contribute one of two things. Either contribute ships to our navy, because it's largely a naval battle that they're fighting here, obviously, or contribute money and we'll build the ships. Most people didn't have the ships, and so they would start contributing money so that Athens can build the ships. And so as they go around, Athens starts getting all this wealth from a bunch of city-states, building up a more and more powerful fleet for themselves. So as they go and they liberate each of these city-states, money starts flowing into Athens. Lots of money starts flowing into Athens. This is the golden age of Athens. This is the Athens that you know and love on the rise, the Athens that builds a Parthenon. This is the Athens of Pericles. This is the Athens he's a part of.
And they rebuilt it.
Yes. They rebuild Athens, even more grand. The Parthenon, a bit of it still standing today. You can go see it.
Bunch of it.
Bunch of it.
Yeah.
So Athens is on the rise, and they're starting to get political, and they have all these people join the Delian League. Now at first, and you can imagine as Athens helps you just reestablish your city-state, and they say, hey, you want to join the league? Pretty much every city-state is saying, yeah, we'll support the war effort, yeah, we'll support the war effort. And so everyone's joining Athens in this Delian League.
Did Persia's government, people just like didn't resist them because they were too powerful to resist, and they really didn't end up liking them, or how?
People resisted. So, for example, one of the things that held Darius up in invading Greece is Egypt did a little revolt. Now he got Egypt back in line.
But it sounds like Persia was mostly a tyrant nation, it seemed like. No one seemed to like them that much.
For these city-states.
The Greek city-states don't, because they had it particularly harsh.
But the rest of Persia was pretty
Yeah, so for a bunch of the Persian Empire, the Persians are seen as pretty nice guys.
Okay.
What they're compared to is what the Babylonians did before, and even worse, what the Assyrians did before. Absolutely brutal. And so the Persians are actually pretty kind rulers. Famous story, Cyrus the Great, when he conquers Babylon, he lets the Jews go back to Jerusalem, and he helps them fund in the rebuilding of their temple. So for a lot of Persia, a lot of the Persian Empire, Persia isn't that bad to be under. These Greek city-states have particularly hard, and then a bunch of Greeks for different reasons. For that earth and water reason, it just wasn't even on the table. Because they joined these alliances where technically they're under Sparta, and they're okay with that. But they're not under Sparta as subjects to Sparta. They're citizens of their city-state, and they have their contracts with Sparta. So that's the big no-go when it comes to negotiating with mainland Greeks, is they won't be slaves, is how they see it. Anyways, so Sparta checks out of the war effort. Athens has tons of success with her allies re-establishing these city-states, and as these city-states get reconquered and are able to be Greek city-states again, rule themselves again, they join the Delian League. Now initially, joining the Delian League was completely optional. But once you joined, as time went on and Athens became more and more powerful, Athens stopped letting people leave. And so what it turned into was essentially an Athenian empire, where all these people were now annually paying tribute to Athens. And it became really hard to leave, because all that money they'd been taken in made them a super powerful navy to control everything. So this is how Athens becomes so powerful. And it gets to the point where arguably Athens is the most powerful one now, not Sparta. Which is a big deal. Sparta's been the big boy on the block for 200 years now.
Yeah.
Anyways, so as that starts coming into Athens, this is going to set up what we call the Peloponnesian Wars. So the Peloponnesian Wars are going to start roughly 430. Let's see. This is 431 BC. Okay, you're seeing Athens at its height right before the Peloponnesian Wars. So what the Peloponnesian Wars are going to be Athens and her allies against Sparta and her allies. And so that's going to be the next big piece of history that we cover when we cover our next chunk of history. We won't be covering that today, but that's just setting up the next event coming up. So gives you a sense for what all our philosophers were living through. So that ends the Greco-Persian Wars. They end up ultimately ending 499 BC. The way that they finally end is Athens makes an attempt to go and actually get Egypt. That fails. And then after that, they negotiate a peace between them and Persia, and you officially have peace. So that becomes the end of the Greco-Persian Wars. And then tempers start rising in the Delian League as Athens becomes more controlling, and it gets setting the stage for Athens versus Sparta in the Peloponnesian War.
Is this yellow the Delian League?
Yes.
Okay.
Except for the red, that's actual Attica coming directly under Athens. But yeah. Any other questions?
Democracy.
Democracy.
When did that start?
Democracy started in Athens 510 BC.
After the tyrant was.
After Hippias was overthrown.
Okay. So they have become a democracy by now.
Yeah, so Athens was a democracy before the Greco-Persian Wars got kicked off. They had been a democracy for roughly 11 years.
Did every one of the city-states that they take back, did they become a democracy?
Democracy becomes a common type of government in Greece, but Greek governments over city-states, they kind of come and go.
Yeah.
And so we're going to see a tyranny gets overthrown by an oligarchy, gets overthrown by a democracy, which reestablishes a tyranny. And so there's cycles of governments in a bunch of these city-states.
Right, okay.
But yes, democracy becomes a common type of government style in Greece.
Does it work very well for them?
It's you'll see a bunch of the huge downsides when they're fighting Sparta. I'll give you one quick jump to the war really quick. Some generals in Athens, they have a defeat that the assembly's angry about and thinks they shouldn't have lost it. So they famously kill these 10 generals. A little bit of time passes, and they have killer's remorse because they need some good generals to lead their army. So it's very fickle.
Yeah.
That's the problem you have. If you can get the mob angry in one day and get them to agree on something, then it goes through. So,
Was it just like a simple democracy, like majority rules?
the Athenian government, it was a simple democracy in that sense. Getting into their government, it's a bit complex, but when it comes to voting on their laws, literally had the assembly, any citizen was allowed to be there and to vote on it, and it was literally, let's vote.
Yeah.
Majority passes. Yeah.
It's probably where the word comes from. Do you know where democracy comes from?
I do not know where democracy comes from, but
It could
demos is...
could very well come from the Greeks.
Oh, it for sure comes from the Greeks. They're the first ones to set that style of
And we
government.
have a democracy today.
For sure.
This was inspired.
So yeah, that's where it started.
They seem to have a similar spirit to the Americans.
Huh?
A similar spirit to the Americans.
Well, so getting into the Constitution, they were very worried about two things. They saw this Athenian government, and so they're very worried about what's called direct democracy. They want representative democracy.
Right.
So you can't have this hot-headed decisions. You select a representative who represents you. So early Greece, that had a huge effect on how they set up, but their systems also largely modeled on the Roman system with the separation of powers.
Right.
But yeah, that's a
So,
whole
did
nother
the-
topic.
Did the Athenian government deal with like judicial problems as well?
Yes, the judicial was the assembly. So famously, you can go read what's called Plato's Apology. This is a dialogue about Socrates' trial. And so it's Socrates defending himself in front of the assembly. If you wanted to vote on the life or death of Socrates, you show up in the assembly that day. You sit there, you listen to him give his argument, and you vote, is he innocent, is he guilty? If you find him guilty, you vote what you think the punishment should be.
I see.
So,
So it
Was he
a-
killed by the democracy?
yes, he was sentenced to death.
No.
Yeah, we'll get to Socrates, but great. I personally, it's my favorite of Plato's dialogues, the Apology. It's a fun one to read because it gives you such a sense of the character of Socrates. And he's just, oh my goodness. We call him a man's man.
Are we gonna talk about that event?
Sorry, what?
Are we gonna talk about that event here in this class?
The trial of Socrates? Yeah, we'll talk about the trial of Socrates. Most of our information on Socrates we pretty much get from that dialogue. So
Oh, cool, really?
we'll get a good amount of that dialogue.
Is it
Yeah.
because they recorded it or all of the trials?
It's one of the dialogues that Plato was actually present for.
Oh.
Because Plato wasn't a student of Socrates in the sense that you are a student of your teacher at a school.
Yeah.
Socrates was a guy who went around and talked, and wealthy youths who didn't have much to do would follow him around and listen to him and hear what he had to say. And so Plato was one of these guys. And the only time Socrates ever mentions him is in trying to reference his brother. He says, I don't see this guy, but I see his brother Plato, and then goes on his way. And that's the only reference to Plato in any of Plato's own dialogues.
That's crazy.
So it doesn't seem like Socrates held Plato in high esteem. And the converse is the case. It doesn't seem like he knew much about him at all. But who knows? So yeah, Plato is our main source for Socrates.
Plato probably knew about Socrates.
Right, so it seems like Plato, unfortunately, Socrates died when Plato was kind of young. So there wasn't a lot of direct overlap there. And so what Plato does in these dialogues is he's going and getting stories of conversations that happened with Socrates over and over again, and then trying to reconstruct those events. Sometimes he goes and he finds a real event and he completely fabricates the story. Sometimes it seems like he's actually trying to recapture the conversation that took place. So you get some of both of that. So yeah, when you read Plato's dialogues, for the most part, all his philosophy is coming from the mouth of Socrates. It's Socrates talking. There's never a dialogue where Plato says what he says.
No.
Plato doesn't have anything to say in his own writings. It's always Socrates or some other person speaking. But the majority of the time, it's Socrates.
So Plato recorded it. Socrates never wrote anything down. Or...
It's kind of like Socrates is to Plato what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are to Jesus.
Oh, okay. Wow.
He never wrote anything himself. People happened to follow him. Now, of course, Jesus had more direction over his apostles, but
Sure.
so closer relationship there, but gives you a sense of it.
Interesting.
So Socrates, as far as we know, didn't actually write anything down. And most of what we get from Plato. Anything else on that? All right, I think we got time for Empedocles.